Hi, everybody. We here at Sound Approach have a groundbreaking discovery. We've just made it, and it's very important. We have discovered that our clients love FTC regulations. So, in honor of that, we are bringing you an update regarding the new amplifier rule that the FTC just released this August in 2024. Now, that rule has standardized the testing metrics that each manufacturer must use in order to make a power output claim. Now, I'm going to read the metric out because it's very specific, and I want to make sure I don't get it wrong here on camera and in front of the entire world. So there are disclosures of compliance with the new FTC regulations, which means that every single specification that you see must disclose whether or not it is compliant with the new FTC regulations. Now, this is going to take time to implement, and the FTC is aware that it will take time, money, and man hours to implement this. So it's not something that's going to happen overnight, but it is going to happen over the next year or so. The second is there are standardized test conditions, and these conditions must be the following. Any power level from 250 milliwatts to the rated power handling capability of the product must be obtainable at all frequencies between 20 and 20,000 kilohertz at an impedance level of 8 ohms after the input signals have been continuously applied for 5 minutes at the auxiliary and or at the phono input. Also, the rated power will be the minimum sine wave of continuous average power. So not RMS, not peak power, not total system power, but continuous average power in wattage per channel. And for multi-channel equipment, the measurement must be made with all channels being driven, not individually one channel at a time, because there is some disparity between whether or not there may be some disparity between the wattage performance for one channel versus maybe 5 channels for a 5-channel amplifier. Now, this rule applies to power amplifiers, home entertainment systems, and subwoofers. It does not specifically apply to powered speakers. So any kind of active bookshelf speaker or inbuilt amplifier that's being used to drive it does not have the same requirements that these power amplifier type products do have. So it will also apply to headphone amplifiers because they reach down to that 250 milliwatt performance level as well. So they also need to follow this new requirement. So this is something that's going to have a huge impact on clients and consumers in the sense that they will now be able to more readily compare and contrast brands and manufacturers. So if you're talking about one brand versus another brand, it will no longer be like trying to compare apples and oranges. Now, that's something that we've actually dived into before on our channel. Please check out this video with the discussion topic regarding power amplifiers and power handling capabilities that we sat down with DJ and discussed. I think about 6 months ago or so, we sat down and discussed how difficult it is for consumers to actually compare and contrast specifications from one brand to another, because each of those manufacturers is using a different testing methodology. Now, they may be using only a specific frequency. They may be using 1 ohms as opposed to 8 ohms in order to increase their power output claims. Now, not to say that any of the specifications that are currently out there are incorrect, they're just not consistent. So the way that manufacturers are now being told they must measure and test is a standardized across the board type solution that will make it much easier for consumers to determine the power capabilities of their equipment. This is going to help them to match new equipment to existing equipment as well. So I think there's a lot of positives that are going to come from this. There's obviously some negatives. The FTC are aware that this may lead to increased pricing because of the man hours and efforts that will be needed in order to comply with the regulation. Some companies are going to have to go back and redo the specifications, redo the testing on their units, reevaluate what the actual wattage is in terms of the standardized testing requirements that the FTC has just released. There is a grace period. I'm not sure how long the grace period is, but I'm going to link below the specific FTC standard if you want to do more research. I also want to link below something that's really important, because at this 8 ohm and 20 to 20,000 kilohertz frequency range, they've also included a distortion level of the THD, or total harmonic distortion. They've included a limitation of 1%. So it's total harmonic distortion plus noise at 1% with those characteristics, the 8 ohms and 20 to 20,000 kilohertz. So they will be able to determine what the power output is within those standards. And it has to be at 1%, because the FTC, after a period of amendments and comments, determined that the previous proposal of 0.1% was much too low and was in fact actually below a person's ability to perceive distortion. And distortion seemed to be a huge part of why they were changing the limitations. Beyond the need to standardize the measurements, they also determined that distortion was an important aspect of this, because we're talking about equipment to listen to sound on. And there was an experiment that was done in Canada, which I thought was very interesting, that determined that at lower frequency ranges, it was very difficult to perceive any kind of distortion. And the reason for that was that the distortion level had to be actually louder in volume than the signal itself. So at anything below 80 hertz, it was almost impossible, unless the volume of the distortion was higher than the volume in decibels of the signal that was being listened to detect it. So it wasn't until 8,000 kilohertz that people are able to actually detect on a regular basis 1% distortion level. So it was determined that the total harmonic distortion plus noise that's introduced by the system must be at a level of 1% or less within that frequency band. So I think that's really key, because it shows that based on the understanding of the FTC and based on the input they received from the manufacturers, certain products would never meet the limitations that they proposed, and they needed the limitations to be different in order to meet the requirements. So it seems like there was some give and take here, and a lot of in-depth analysis put forth by the FTC to make sure that these regulations made sense. And that's something that, historically speaking, the Amplifier Rule is kind of not covered at all. The original rule from 1974 was to prevent widespread claims of power output that were just fabricated. And they didn't go far enough in setting the standardized testing methodology. Instead, they allowed every manufacturer to use their own testing methodology, and then they had to report on that methodology. They had to say, this will be at this performance level, which is what most companies have done. But because of the new standardization, every company will be working off of the same platform, the same standard, and it'll be much easier for consumers to compare and contrast products from one brand or one manufacturer to another. So I think that covering this topic is important for consumers to understand when they're looking at this. So if they see a specification that says this is not FTC compliant standard, it doesn't mean that the specifications are wrong or bad or misleading. It just means that they have not adapted yet to the new Amplifier Rule, which over time is going to be completed, I imagine, by every manufacturer, especially as new products come out. So this is going to take a bit of time. But if you run into that, it doesn't mean that it's not FTC compliant. It just means that the rating for the power output has not been updated to the new FTC regulation. I hope that makes sense. It is going to take time. But one other aspect, like I discussed, the disclosure aspect, is that all the specifications ratings now will have to be disclosed whether or not they're compliant. And that's for the grace period to come into compliance. So I hope that all makes sense. I know this is not a very interesting topic for everybody, but it is important for everyone. You know, it's interesting to some, but important to everyone. So if you have any questions or you'd like to learn more about this, please visit our website, soundapproach.com, and take a look at our power amplifiers. We have our listings are updated, and we've made the required disclosures on them, and we're waiting for the input from the manufacturers as it comes in on how to change the specifications so that they all align the way that we want them to. Again, it'll take some time, but we will get there. If you have any comments, please leave them down below. You can also check the description. I'm going to leave links for the experiment I discussed and also the new FTC regulations so you can read it yourself and make whatever sense you can of it. It is an interesting read. It's important for consumers, retailers, and manufacturers. It is going to have an impact on the industry, and I think this is something that's important for everyone to know about as we move forward into the future. So, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content today, and if not, I'm really sorry. I know it's kind of a boring subject, but something that needed to be discussed. We'll talk to everyone soon, and take care. Bye.